Caroline, welcome to This is Horror podcast.
Michael, hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, it is a pleasure and it is a long time coming. As I said to you off air, yeah,
Like a long time, right? We're talking like a long time because this
yeah,
started with Dark Sisters, right?
it did. It did.
Which
It
is now
it start
paperback.
Yeah, so I think it must have been a couple of years that we've been wanting to have this conversation, but it's been a wild 2 years, both on a kind of global level and also like there's been some stuff going on personally with me. I know there's been stuff going on personally with you too, but we're doing it. We are here.
We are here. Yeah, I feel like, and that's kind of in the air. It feels like everyone
Yeah.
is having a moment and is just like coming out of a thing that I feel it in the road when I'm driving. I feel it just in the grocery store just today. Like a little scary.
Yeah. Yeah. But we are going to go much further back than the last 2 years because, as I traditionally like to do with these conversations, I want to know what early life lessons you had growing up in Cape Cod. And it doesn't necessarily have to pertain to writing or creativity, but just anything that you gleaned during those formative years.
Life lessons. I like that. I think that both my parents were really passionate about the things they loved. And I saw before I understood what I was seeing that it's just really good to love those things you love and have something you're obsessed with and then have to all different things so there can be seasons with them. So I felt very encouraged to be my obsessive self and spend a lot of time with my dollhouse. Like I really believe in play. And I feel like
Mm,
the skill you take through life that if your tendency is to find a way to play with things, to find adventure, like the cheesy Instagram version of it would be like every day is a gift but it's like it is. And
yeah.
I try to take that into things. And I feel like it's helpful when things don't go your way. And it's also helpful when things are good because it you don't get to I guess it takes you out of feeling like you're reacting to things or waiting for permission to feel certain ways. It's so important to be able to get a kick out of things and make yourself happy, no matter what the hell is going on. Like whether you're getting
Yeah.
good news or bad news or yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had my
Yeah.
Barbies, my dollhouse, all the sick things going on in there, and that just brought me great joy. And
Yeah, I mean it I often like to know as well about, first experiences with story, but it sounds like that might be kind of intertwined with that. So was the first experience you kind of getting these like scenarios with the Barbies and the dollhouse? And I
oh
like how you
yeah,
said sick things happening. So what kind of things did
yeah.
these
Like my brother,
debaucherous
those
Barbies get up
oh my
to?
God, those poor dolls. It was just never normal. And part of that was
Yeah.
I felt free to, all right, I wasn't asking myself why, but I'll put it this way. I was assembling the toys. Like my brother had the Star Wars figures that were mostly men and monsters. And I had these little dolls called Glamour Gals that were so
Yeah.
80s that they would never make now because literally Glamour Gals. The best ad that I ever found was parties, galas, and toward all these words that are all shopping, fun, they're dancing, they're basically coke whores. And then at the end, it's and some of them have jobs, basically, But so I put them together in my dollhouse, and that was great fun because I wanted all a world with all different
Mm.
kinds of people, monsters, and then there was this room upstairs, and I remember that was where someone was always trapped and locked, and that was just the way it was, and that was always changing. And I remember having a friend over and she was like, that's supposed to be the baby's room, and I'm like, what? That is the upstairs dungeon. And then
Yeah.
felt weird about that, but in a good way. And then with my Barbies, it was more about kidnapping, where do you remember that Hall and Oates song Out of Touch?
Right. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I would play that cassette, and when you had to rewind over and over again, and Barbie would just be going along and get put in this van and taken away. And then there were the more innocent things, like my brother and I. Like I feel like it was this thing of being industrious and very much wanting to be an adult, but in a playful way. Like
Mm,
we ran what we called the Cutie Express, which in our house was this like wagon that the stuffed
mm.
animals had to get dropped off and picked up, like almost like we were driving this bus. And the lives that we developed for them just kept getting darker and darker. Like it would start off like, oh, they're, he's going out to lunch, gotta go to the hospital, like, uh-oh, like someone's getting arrested, like just.
Yeah.
And then it was that too as kids in our neighborhood. Like I grew up in Cape Cod, which is like in the winter and the off season in our neighborhood, especially just more deserted. So it
Mm.
was very conducive to like wild imaginings of like someone squatting in a house or like is someone in there, and always imagining that. My brother and I, before we understood it was not like how the world works, would also just go through people's mailboxes and bring it back. But it was like I always had this curiosity about what's going on in other people's homes and like and what did they get. And back then, especially with catalogs, it was just fascinating to see like catalogs that we didn't get, or wonder like what the letter in there is about that seemed thick. And again, we didn't like, it wasn't illegal in the sense that we didn't steal the mail. We did take it out and like look through it. We're just like an interception between the US Post Office and the person getting the
Yeah.
mail.
Yeah.
But I
Just the
liked having
kind of quality control thing, making sure,
quality
it's all
control.
legit.
Yeah. And I loved having that sense of living in two places where there would be that time when like the neighborhood was just so much quieter and desolate and the lake frozen over, and like imagining like terrible things going on in this island on the lake. And then in the summer, just very crowded, very like, Jawsian in that spirit, like
Mm.
of like, New England summer. And I liked that, living in two places. And that's something that I don't know, that I always feel like I come back to a lot. And where did you grow up?
As I grew up in the UK, so I grew up in like the Birmingham kind of region in between Birmingham and Worcester, so in the center of the UK.
Yes.
Like yeah, kind of just a middle of the road gray rainy town. Very very stereotypical kind of the Midlands, I suppose. Um
Yes.
yeah.
Could you walk to things, or like
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
have to run?
Yeah, I mean, you could walk to things. I think, compared to places like America and Australia, most things are kind of in walking distance. And even though I lived in like quite a small town, you could walk to a marginally busier one in an hour. I know an hour is, but it's
Oh yeah,
okay,
but you guys just walk. It's my favorite thing whenever I go over there
Yeah.
and they describe something as a short walk, and I'm like, that was a fucking hike. Like in America, like
Yeah.
that, like I love that there's a whole different system of gauging that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like, I mean, some British listeners might disagree with me, but I think relatively speaking, the train system is quite good. I know people listening will be like, "Yeah, but it's never on time." But well, I mean, it turns up eventually, so you can get
Yeah,
somewhere. Yeah,
function is pretty good. Like I'd say that's, yeah, functioning matters.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you could. If you so chose, you could go from my little town. You could walk to the other town in an hour, or if you happen to get the very infrequent bus, then that'd take you 20 minutes. Then you could get a train to Birmingham, which is the second biggest city in the UK,
Yeah.
and you can do that in under an hour. So even though it
Yeah,
was
you
somewhat
could do that.
rural, it was connected.
Yes. And that to me is so empowering. Like that's what I
Mm,
like where I lived. Cape Cod is like, you go over a bridge to get there, and you can't walk to anything, and there's not that
yeah.
public transportation. That's where I grew up, like fantasizing about cities and thinking, yeah, like you can just go somewhere. You don't need someone to take you there, and you don't necessarily need a car. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting as well with the UK how different like different cities are, even if they're like relatively near. Because I mean, Oxford is like a whole other world entirely, and everyone's on bicycles there, even though I mean, you can walk easier in Oxford than you can
Yeah.
the town that
Yeah.
I grew up in. But I think it's part of the charm, really. People on bicycles with scarves and little baker boy hats and things like that.
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah, and I feel like I always wanna try it again, but as a child, like, me and bicycles, we could just not get along, and
Yeah.
I had that we were doing I feel like my friends and I were doing a neighborhood invasion thing, and I fell off my
Mm.
bikes, and the person at the house, like, I was the one left over, and that just scarred me, and I had scraped my knee and just never felt safe on a bike. And I think, "Oh, it's
Yeah.
good, it's a liberating thing, and I wanna try it," but I know I probably won't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really use a bicycle much at all. It's like I can walk places. I can drive. It's like, that's surely more useful. Either walk, drive, or take the buses and trains. And I mean, here in Japan, again, the public transport system is like, I mean, it's better than the UK because everything's connected. And on this occasion,
Mm.
things actually turn up the time that they say they will, which
Yes.
which is
How cool.
was quite the novelty initially. Like, hang on, wait, the bus is on time. It's
Can
actually
imagine, I bet
here.
you're just going places because you can't believe that, like, "Oh, it says 10:01 and it's 10:01 and it's here," so, yeah, like
Yeah. The only danger with that is like I'm kind of rather than a just in case person, I'm a just in time, which means I'm always rushing for whatever I'm getting. And these things are so on time that it's like if you turn up and it's like 10:01 and 45 seconds, it might have gone. So you got to almost set your watch a few minutes,
yes,
earlier
lie to
than
your
um later, in fact, yeah, than it actually is. Yeah. But we've deviated quite far somehow from kidnapping Barbies, but I know when you said that
the
when you
wonderful voice.
said that, yeah, yeah, I was thinking it's kind of foreshadowing, the glass room and Joe Goldberg. It's like even from an early age when you didn't know that's what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that there are two different kinds of imagination sometimes, like people who just imagine a lighter world and we need that, and
Mm,
then there are people who imagine a darker world and we need that. And
yeah,
we crave those different like I'm reading a book right now that I feel like is very sweet and like you can tell that it's going to have a happy ending and I like that. And then I
mm,
know tomorrow I'm starting something that is not that way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, I've always like, yeah, I always think the worst. I imagine the worst. I expect the kidnapping. I always expect something bad to happen. Growing up, like my bedroom was at the front of the house and faced the front yard. And it was just like every night someone's coming through that window. And I
yeah,
don't know. I'm like, I realize like, oh, other people wouldn't think that. I think that's what's weird about and funny about growing up and kind of knowing yourself. Like,
yeah.
going like, "Okay, I'm someone who sees the window and thinks about someone breaking in."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But you talking about reading something that it's very comfortable and you know that you're going to have a happy ending. Now you must have had this experience, but occasionally there is a book or a film where it just completely does a hard left turn, like in the kind of third act or towards the end of the second act, and I absolutely love the way
Yeah.
that they catch me off guard. And it's like yeah, I know, because I read such a wide variety, but when I'm reading something that's cozy, it's like, wouldn't it be fun if they just inverted this and just absolutely fuck things up? And occasionally they do, and it's
Oh, and it's
amazing.
the same thing I love the reverse of that too, when you're watching something
Yeah,
dark and you can't help but think even if you know that, like, it's not the kind of story where things work out. Like, I think of The Strangers. And I
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
"Someone's gonna save this," and it's like, "Nope, nope." Like, that I was like, why did I waste my energy, like, wanting something like for like a twist, for them to overpower the people. And it's like, that's why I don't know. I love that movie for that because it made me so aware of like this conviction that like there is going to be a twist. And when there is no
yeah.
twist, it's almost a twist. Like,
Yeah, I guess that it doesn't happen commonplace because this thing that we want, that is not the norm. That is not kind of regular kind of audience expectations. And I guess, people get a lot of pushback from it. But there's this one film. I don't know if it's called Miracle Mile or if I've got the wrong title here, but it's from the 80s and it starts off as if it's pretty much just a standard romance, and then it turns into an apocalypse film about the halfway point, and I love that because it comes out of
Oh, I
nowhere.
love yes,
Yeah,
mhm, yes. I love things like that when I feel like there's so much art in that, and it's more like the way
yeah,
that life is, you know?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Sometimes you live in a
Yes, like
romance, and then it's an apocalypse, which seems strangely apropos for the the last few years.
yes. And
But
sometimes, like, there is
mm,
no way out and the bad guy does win, and I think that's what another thing, like, it's just always been my tendency, like, when I would write short stories and they would always be dark and there wouldn't be that, like, the girl fights back and wins. And for me, I'm like, to me, there's catharsis in reading that because it's just like, unfortunately, we live in a world where there are predators and it's part of
yeah,
nature. And I've that's what I've heard from a lot of readers over the year who were like, this was cathartic for me to see this story that help me understand how I got into this situation and how you don't always know what you're dealing with. And
mm,
yeah, like
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing too with watching a lot of Japanese cinema, particularly particularly so-called romance and social commentary, because I feel, I mean it's kind of a given with a Western romance that the two people are going to get together at the end, or if there's some injustice that at least on some level is going to be overcome. But the amount of
yes, we
times where I've watched a Japanese so-called romance or drama and the end is like, no, it just her life, because it usually unfortunately is a woman who's getting fucked over in these situations. It's like her life just didn't get better. It got worse. Like, and she's suffering all these injustices and nobody did anything about it. And so, like, often I can go away from these dramas feeling more depressed than if I'd watched a straight up
yeah,
horror.
absolutely. And I gotta know, like, are those like, do you tend to go see those in a theater? Because I wonder when the lights come on, like the atmosphere of that, something like that, you know? Or do you watch
So
mostly at home?
much of the time, I'm watching them at home because my Japanese isn't quite good enough to kind of get by without some form of subtitles. Like, it'd be great to be able to do that, like in the cinema at some point. But yeah, it's
Yes.
mostly at home right now. Um,
Yes.
Although I guess the best of that kind of film you'd probably be seeing more in an art house or an independent cinema rather than the commercial ones, which I mean at the moment commercial
But I like
cinemas seem yeah, what was that?
like, I like that this story that, like, that lets it not all that doesn't feel like it owes you that,
Mm,
feel that lift. I'm like, sometimes
yeah,
things don't work. And I
yeah.
feel like all like, America is so obsessed with things working out.
Mm,
And, like, I love the movie When Harry Met Sally, but I remember being young,
yeah,
and I love, when they have those little interviews with the couples, but I'm like, I know that what this is doing is, like, programming us that, like, "Yes, it works out, it works out, it works out." And it's like,
yeah,
not always.
yeah. Well, I mean, these days, if I'm seeing a movie, I try not to watch the trailer or read anything about it because then, like, they normally show you parts of the third act, and I want to
I
go
know,
into things cold.
I know, I do too, like, I was happy to see a friend's film last week where I didn't read anything on purpose, and it's not gonna be out for a
Mm,
while, and it was such a refreshing experience to go in truly knowing nothing. And I wish
mm,
we could have that experience more often. And I think maybe there will be some like reverse marketing because especially I think those trailers too were more effective. years ago, before there was so much ability to see so much every day and to watch so many small
Yeah.
clips. Like I've this thing right now of watching people roller skating, whatever. It's just like they're there, and I can't roller
Yeah.
skate. I like the music and I like the choreography, but I'm like, yeah, to think of like earlier eras when we just couldn't watch that many short things, trailers had more
Yeah.
impact. But
Yeah.
now, like when they it's just in a slew of other things you're in taking, and yes, they show so much more than they used to show, and they kind of tell you how to feel going in, and I hate that. It's and I don't like the
Yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes of it. Like I don't want to know what anyone don't always want to know what everyone thinks about everything. So it's getting harder and
Yeah.
harder to avoid knowing that. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like, sometimes the Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb score can give you a broad indication, but sometimes, in my opinion, just the consensus is wrong, and you'll
I
get
know
something that's been absolutely panned, and it's like, no, this was great,
my brain is
and
wired when it's like 31%, you know, ripe, or whatever it is. Like I'm like, ooh, like I want to see the thing that's not well reviewed and well received. Like,
yeah, yeah, that's
remember a few
it.
years ago, more than a few years ago, someone made that trailer for The Shining where they had the Peter Gabriel song Salisbury Hill, and they made it look all sunshiny. I wish
Oh
someone would
yeah,
do that for a movie, because I feel like, and kind of pull it off, so that you would go
yeah,
into it like, whether it was a horror movie, if they would do it like that. If it was a love story, they would make it look like a fucking nightmare stalking thing. And then so you could
yeah.
go in and be like, "Oh, wait, what happened?" You know?
Yeah. No, I love those kind of trailers, those spoofs, those mashups, because I also saw one where they'd done it for Mrs. Doubtfire and they'd made it into a horror story. Because if you kind of
Yes.
think about it, I mean, it can be. It's like this guy is creepily through methods of deception getting
Yeah,
access to his children that he shouldn't have access to. And
absolutely. Yeah, I feel like now if you did that, like try to pitch that movie, it'd be like, "Oh my god, what's wrong with you?"
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you could do that for so many things, particularly like British sitcoms from I guess the 70s and 80s, like Faulty Towers. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I mean, yeah, it's about this narcissistic hotel owner who's like bullying his wife, his employees, his Spanish waiter, particularly. I mean, I don't think you probably couldn't do that today. It's just like
Yeah,
this is too
and
much.
that's much older, but even something like I love Peep Show, and I'm like, I feel
Yeah,
like they wouldn't really do that today. But like, it just
yeah,
everything about it, I just it's one of those to be that deep in their heads. And I love when like the woman
right.
starts talking, just like not listening. Like,
Yeah, yeah. No,
but
Peep Show is up there with my favorite shows of all time. Um, I, I guess for similar reasons as to why I love Curb Your Enthusiasm, just this kind of awkward commentary on situations and people just making these absurd kind of remarks and
yes,
so
and when
good.
they let it be a like, I love the nothing of it, that they're just out there living, like that
Yeah,
there isn't the like elaborate plot. It's just that's the brilliance. And yet there are like in Curve, I guess the plot is so elaborate. I feel like it's all twisty. So that's not true what I just said. But but still there's that element of like you feel them just kind of hanging out. And
yeah,
I love that hangout kind of thing. And I feel like that's why people always go back to Office and the Friends here, because those were the
yeah,
last two like super popular, widely seen things really before cell phones. And
yeah,
this book I'm right now is making me think of it because a girl time travels to the 90s. And the first thing
right.
she says when she walks to school is like, oh my God, no one's on their phone. Like they're all just walking
Yeah,
around. And it's like there is something as a human that, like, when you think of what it means to be a human in the world has changed so much in that way in a short matter
mm,
of time. And I
yeah,
try and remember
yeah,
sitting in a restaurant waiting for someone without a cell phone. Like, what did you do? Did you just stare at people? Like,
yeah. I mean, it can be quite surreal being on the subway, and like if you actually look around, no one's looking at anyone. They're looking at these devices, and I think
Yes,
too, like there could be an argument that it almost creates a social pressure for you too to look at your device, because we've created this bizarre situation where now if I'm looking at other things, it's like, is that guy okay? Have we got a problem here? Why is he just like looking straight ahead? Is he gonna do
that is
something?
so true because now the way that socialization and ingestion of things goes on in there, we think if someone's not constantly communicating or absorbed in something, that there's something wrong with them, which is so
Yeah,
crazy. Like that's so true.
yeah,
That like
yeah,
staring, I feel like a good stare is just great, and the way that like yeah, doing that now makes you look like there's something wrong with you.
yeah, yeah. But I guess mentioning Peep Show and Curb Your Enthusiasm, I can certainly see how some of that stylistically has come into you and has come into Joe Goldberg with his like observations. And I mean, he,
Absolutely.
yeah. And for me, I mean, he's the most kind of charismatic and I guess infectious kind of personality who you know you shouldn't, if not like, then be drawn to. But you know, the best since Patrick Bateman for me. It really, he really is a
You.
character who has that about him.
And I love yeah, reading American Psycho was just like a major experience in my young life that like opened the door of like, oh, this is a book. Like I just remember I kept closing it like
Yeah,
this is a book. I'm so happy this is a book that like this is something I want to do. Like I like this the way he's just going on about Whitney Houston for pages and pages and then you
yeah,
know, the mix it up like that mashup. Yes. So I like that because I also feel like in those books it's not a, like you're with someone. When you're reading,
mm,
it's such a unique experience that way. It's like you're so the person you're with, it's not about they're not real, and that's part of the point. But if you're with
mm,
anyone for that amount of time and that intensity, it's very possible to feel close to them and uncomfortably close. And that's what I love is that feeling that like it's a safe way to like warm up to someone who in real life, number one, you might warm up to because they might seem okay. And number two, who if you knew these things, you would never.
yeah,
It's yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Happy to hear
So,
you say that. Yeah, that's what I or even I remember when it was first coming out, I've always been so bad at like synopses and describing things.
right,
And I would always well, he's this guy, he's had a hard time and he loves to read and you know, he works in a bookstore. And it took me forever to get to the murder part because there's a level of denial because
yeah,
he doesn't see himself that way. And that I feel like is also where I like him as a character because that was part of where I liked finding my way into him of like imagine how great it would be to kind of always like never always see yourself as justified in everything you've ever done.
yeah,
Pretty good. I want to see what that's
yeah,
like.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, he has main character syndrome to a point that few really do, and I mean, he's obviously capable of reflection, but I'm just not convinced that he's ever had true empathy. You know?
No, and that's where like what was really fun with this book is like that in the last book he was there was kind of an obsession with empathy and the
Mm,
woman in the book wanted to open the empathy bordello, a bookstore. And in this one
yeah,
it was like I love with the book getting to think of how that process changed him and changed the way
yeah,
that he rationalized things. So I love the idea like well if he was going to write a book with most people like there's an element of like facing your demons and with him
mm,
it would just be like no absolutely understanding on an even deeper level how nothing was his fault and how
right,
he is the victim of being drawn to these women who are just terrible and so then associating with people who are not good people. And I love the idea that like he would go through this process of writing a novel and come out feeling better than himself about himself than ever. Like
yeah, yeah. And I want to speak a lot about you and about Joe Goldberg, but I want to go back a little bit before we really dive deep into it because I want to know like what were the first stories that you wrote and what was the first point where you decided, okay, this is something that I want to pursue professionally? Because I know that, okay, well, you've said that, of course, you were playing with these dolls from a very early age. You released Stephen Crane in 2004. So what?
Yeah,
And then it wasn't until 10 years later, of course, that you came out in 2014. So let's talk a little bit about those early years and the, I guess, evolution of yourself as a writer.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I was little in our school, we had to write these little short stories, and mine were always bleak. And there
Yeah.
was one that I started reading that like I was a normal child, and I'm like, there was a princess, and it was, and then suddenly, and she, the prince, and it's like, well, not everyone lives happily ever after, and like someone dies or there's divorce or something, and the teacher's like, oh, Caroline, and I'm like, oh my god, no, like, so that was always there. And then in high school, I wrote a short story about a girl who overdosed on angel dust and was so speaking
Mm,
from death. And I
yeah.
was a very like young 14. Like I didn't know how you even did angel dust. I feel like I loved the phrase, I loved the name of it, the
Yeah.
idea, and it was a very dark story and like
Mm,
no real joy to come of it. And it got me, time with the school guidance counselor, but it also got me a typewriter from Sassy Magazine, which was just my religion in high school. So
right.
that was a very experience and I liked short stories. But as is often the case, like I was so excited by that and to have that kind of like life altering thing of like, oh my God, my name's in my favorite magazine and this story, it's an honorable mention and I'm young. The next thing I wrote was like so terrible.
Right.
Like just terrible because it was totally like I feel like it's an experience that learning for a long time over and over of like sometimes when you feel really good it's the worst time to go and write.
Right.
And that happened to me again in college where I wrote a story and my professor was like, this is amazing, like this is, everyone stop talking about it, I just, this is fabulous, like this is like, who was it that she compared it to? And I remember just getting puffed up like, not Eudora Welty but someone like that, someone like. So then I go into her office and I'm like, actually, it's a novel. And she's like, okay. And I go and do the same thing again, where then I'm puffed up and I write, and it's embarrassing to even say out loud. But it was one of those things where I'm like using indentations and using the blank space. And that was not my
Mm,
style. Like some people do that,
right.
that's part of what they're doing. This was a complete, like, I was in my ego, and she was like, this is like terrible. And so it's for me, it's a process of like learning know that like you don't need to necessarily feel bad about the world, about yourself, but there has to be, it can't come from this place of like I'm doing this because someone said I'm good. And
Mm,
that's where like I feel like what you learn by writing a lot, and I'm always trying to get back to that place of like being hard on myself, being hard on the thing. And so I just kept writing many, many short stories. And then I went to work in journalism and felt that like that problem for me. Well, I worked at Tiger Beat, which I don't know if it's like a magazine about pop stars.
right.
And so that was all fiction, where so many times like we would just have pictures of the artists and just make up quotes because so I was like, this is perfect for me because like I like making stuff up, and I knew that that was always a
Yeah.
problem in journalism. But after that, and sometimes we would do interviews, but you know what I'm saying, like if there's a picture of a guy holding a puppy, he can say, I love dogs, like dogs are the best, and like who's gonna get mad at that, right? Like no
Right.
publicist gonna, like, he never said he loves dogs. But then I went to Entertainment Week, and where I learned about fact checkers, and like I went to a Sopranos party and I had a great time and I had some drinks and I'm like write my whole thing up, and they're like, where are your notes? I'm like, notes, like this is my memory pretty much, like everything's pretty much, and they're like,
Yeah.
no, there's no pretty much. And I'm like, at Tiger Beat we didn't have fact checkers. And so that experience was really good, of like really hardcore writing, close reading, close editing to try and
Mm,
review a book or a TV show or a movie in like 300 words was so much
mm,
harder than if you have like 2000 words.
yeah.
And to go so many rounds of edits. and really like extra intensively think about every word in there on a microscopic level and have different editors doing the same thing. I loved that process. Like that like experience was really good and made me like I feel like helped me become a better writer. And then I went and did gossip reporting that was like good, just only kind of served my like I must do creative writing. Like I don't want to like be eavesdropping. I want to
Right.
eavesdrop and let it inspire me to make something up. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And then I went to work in television and in a room with writers, and I liked that element, but like I feel like all the while the one thing that the constant in my life has always been short stories. That like no
Mm.
matter what I was doing, I was always had to be some short story I was working on, that like my brain without that would start to go haywire and sad. And then I made a short film, and that process of like dealing in the real world and
Mm.
with not having permits and night shoots and lighting and all the elements, like after that I was like, okay, like I am now ready to sit down and write a novel. Like cuz the way in a
Mm.
novel, like not so much like you don't artistically control when you're like trying to figure it out, but the way you don't have to answer to anyone, explain to anyone, the way it's such an immersive kind of secret experience.
Mm.
And when I'd written, I feel like a couple of books before. Oh, and the Stephen Crane thing, like that. I loved that experience too because I didn't know what year it was until you said it. And something in that book that he had talked a lot about was how experiences have to go through the filter. And I loved when I was
Mm.
writing you and coming back to Stephen Crane and thinking, oh my God, like I remember when I first moved here and I was at the Los Angeles Public Library downtown every day, like digging up all these books about Stephen Crane. It was just like very exciting, to be in writing a book that wasn't a novel, but about learning about someone who wrote novels and their individual process and how kind of like the way everyone's is different. And I feel like that's a
Mm.
thing that in our culture of massive advice and instructions is so important to know that like you can get all the advice in the world, but there's no way to escape learning how your brain works. And I feel like
Yeah.
that took for that first novel, for like the first novels I'd written just didn't feel like me, or I was doing a cheat thing where I'd take a bunch of short
Mm.
stories and kind of do a search and replace and try and
Yeah.
kind of patchwork a novel. And it was
Yeah.
like, no. Yes. So with you, it was like once I liked being in his head. I worked so hard on that first chapter, almost as if it was a short story,
Mm.
and gave myself time like living in there like for months of just like rewriting, doing that like style of that from Entertainment Weekly of like treating each 300 words like, okay, each one matters. Why? Is there a better way? Memorizing it in my
Mm.
head, walking down the street, like reading it to myself, all of that. And then once I felt like confident in it, like going forward, but still trying to always making myself feel better to think of it as a bunch of short stories from this guy's
Mm.
perspective that are building. It was like the minute I start to think, it's a novel. I'm like, I don't know, it's overwhelming. But when you think of
Yeah.
things broken down, like when you find all these little mini beginning, middles, and ends, it's like for me, that's a big comfort space, that like
Mm.
reminding myself that day, there will be a moment to like take a step back and see how they all work together and what needs to be changed. But first, you have to like have that something there.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Is that
Yeah, I feel like,
still Yeah. Is that how you typically approach novel writing still to this day? I mean, and how much planning is going into it initially before you sit down to write that first draft? Now, I suppose too, with having a publisher, it might vary a little bit too, because you probably kind of got to give them at least an indication as to what it is you're working on.
yes, yes, like absolutely. And I feel like I'm a really like calendar deadline oriented person. So the same way that like I
Mm,
have to make an elaborate outline and think almost even in the back of my head, knowing none of this will work or happen, but I need that.
mm,
Like I the same
mm,
way that like when I'm in it, when I'm drafting, I'm like in my phone, it just looks like a crazy person where it's like page 12 through 36 today, then page 37 to 48.
yeah.
Like I feel like I'm my own little gerbil and I have to have these
Mm.
goals and constantly meeting them. And I feel like that's a lift. and it doesn't necessarily isn't the best process in the world, but that's how I get through that first draft. And I
Mm.
also like in with every book more, now I'm more comfortable with like, okay, like if I'm, 100 pages in and I've just cracked a nut, I'm like, tomorrow, yay, is like a holiday from my calendar that
Mm.
was pre-planned. And instead of, 112 to 148, I'm going back to chapters 2 and 4 to like
Yeah.
use the knowledge that I just figured out to play with them. So I feel like I don't know, that's how I need to feel like some days are school or work days and other days are vacation because I love that writing
Mm.
that feels like a vacation or like a reward for the work that you've done. It's all punishments and rewards like all the way around. And
Yeah. Yeah. No, I certainly find myself that the first draft is the hardest of all the drafts. So like I much prefer having this skeleton, this template, and then going back and working on it. That I guess the hardest point is just completing that first draft and making sure that I'm not going back to the earlier pages, when I'm meant
yes.
to be completing the skeleton. But I like this idea of giving yourself a holiday. So, like, I mean, at the moment, the current thing I'm working on, I guess it's about 35,000 words through. It's probably going to be about 75,000, but it would
Oh,
be a much more
what?
enjoyable day to be rewriting the earlier chapters rather than plowing forth.
Right, and it keeps your spirits up, and I feel like it's like any
Yeah.
quest, like, when you think of wagon trains or boats, it's like, there are those days where you push ahead, and then there has to be that day where, like, the skies are good, you drop the anchor, and kind of tidy the boat. That's how I look at it, like,
Yeah.
it's like, this is a way to appreciate how far I've come and what I've done, and it makes you kinda
Mm.
want to go forward, because it's a good reminder for your brain that, like, that's part of the fun. Now I'm curious, are you the type of person who when you finish that first draft, do you think this is it? Like, do you get that high of like getting to the end and feel like it's actually not a first draft, but it's there, it's the book? Or do you like are you in, oh my god, this is shit? Like,
Oh, so it really does depend from project to project, but I think I think typically it's almost like there's a combination of what you've just described. So I'm very happy that I've got to the end, and it's not as shit as at some point I thought it might be, but I'm like, right now I can really go through and I can mold this. But what I have found sometimes is that then when I go back to it and I'm reading the start and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. Who wrote this? So it's almost in the second draft, reading the first draft when I've got some distance. I'm like, okay, maybe I do have something here. But I mean,
yes.
the way that I'm planning my writing at the moment is so a month or so ago, I finished the first draft of a screenplay. And then I was like, right, I'm gonna park that, finish the first draft of a novel. And then when that's done, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna redraft the screenplay. But I think, that redrafting from the first draft will get it to pretty near the final draft, because probably I do three drafts in total on average. So you've got the first one to just get it all down, then you've got
Yep.
the serious work and making it sing. The third one is just really little details, and then I think I'm complete. And sometimes an editor does not think I'm complete, but that's my time to send it to beta readers and editors and my manager and just get some feedback on that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that like it's so emotional. Like you captured that
Mm.
where it is like very extremely mixed emotions where you look at that part and
Mm.
think, yes, I did that, I did that, I did that. And then you
Mm.
have that like, oh, that it's not done. Like it's taken me like with every draft I finish, I have to like kind of keep my mouth shut because I
Yeah.
think that that's it. And even though I
Yeah.
know it's not, I like have to almost get through that feeling and then and I believe like you said like time away from things is so important. It really is. Like there's nothing better than finishing a draft of something, immersing yourself in something else. Because I really believe too that, excuse me, stuff is going on in the back of your head when you're not
Yeah.
thinking about something. And I love that
Yeah.
feeling. I think that's the best reward for coming back to something when you're like, oh my God, like I didn't know how to fix this. And it's like something went on in those weeks when you were like doing other work, that there is this little place. I picture all these little minions back there like doing work, and then
Yeah.
they get to impress they did. And
Yeah. And I've found too, reading back, there are points where I foreshadowed things that I didn't realize I was foreshadowing. And it's like, wait, something's gone on here.
that is one of my favorite fucking things of all. That is
Yeah.
the best
Yeah.
feeling. Mhm. And when there are
Yeah.
things that like you were kind of attached to for no reason, and they kind of you see something later and you're like, "Oh my God, that's why I was
Yeah.
attached to it. I didn't know why." And yeah, I love that so mumuch. That's where I feel
Yeah.
like when the fun of it, that's where I feel like it can't be said enough. It's only like you get through that first draft because of exactly that. Because of course it's going to
Yeah.
be like worse than you thought in some ways, but there are going to be those little magical surprises like that when you realize what you've done, and then you get to just like
Yeah.
sweeten it and do more. And but you don't get there if you don't have that first draft.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And I just think like kind of reminding myself, like, well, I've completed this first draft numerous times before. It's like this is a thing that I am capable of doing. I mean, actually, what we're talking about now, it's the subject of the next This Is Horror newsletter that I'm going to be sending out. So this is very much fresh in my mind. But I mean, the overarching point that I'm trying to make to writers is don't compare your in progress first draft with the final draft, with the finished book of another work that you put out. And especially do not compare it to the work of other writers. It's like you've got no business doing that. You just compete against yourself.
Yes, and that's where be careful with your reading, because I feel like your brain
Yeah.
is so ripe for self-loathing, self-doubt, for like, oh, I may as well throw it
Yeah.
away. But like that, you have to prime yourself for reading after you finish the drafts, and you have to. I feel like that's
Yeah.
when it's good to read something that like feels is like another language, and kind of far away from what you do, because you're less likely to like be analyzing it. I feel like they're all different kinds of reading that are so important
Yeah.
at different times, that it's like cravings, like meals.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're writing something, are you kind of conscious of what it is you're reading at the same time? Do you kind of curate that, or do you just read whatever the hell you want to read?
A little bit of both almost. Like I feel like there are books that I'll realize I mentioned in the book, like especially with the U books, and I'll be like, "Oh my
Mm.
god, like I mentioned the book, I want to know why." So I'll pick it up,
Yeah.
I'll get past that. I'm never finishing my book. This is wonderful. Like I'm not a writer and keep
Yeah.
going, and I don't necessarily finish things. And then I feel like sometimes when you're in that place too, it can be good to go in a bookstore and kind of roam around and remember that the
Mm.
world needs many books, all different kinds of
Yeah.
books. That's the point of like where all this self doubt is kind of a waste of time, or the like, I feel like to make all that more part of the writing about the book, not
Mm.
about you, because
Yeah.
like who cares what you are? Someone else is going to read the book and like it, and someone else is going to hate it. But that's why there are so many books. Like that's where there's not one
Yeah.
book out there. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
but
think
then
something that. Oh, yeah. Please.
no, go ahead. Oh,
Well,
I
I
was
was
gonna say
going
that about that. I started reading The Listener, and I hadn't read it in a while. And that was when I was writing You Love Me, and I was like, I can't do this right now. Like I forgot how much I
Yeah.
love this book. And it's like kind of like I just love his prose. And it was getting me like,
Mm.
why do I bother? And I was like, okay, okay, like not right now. Like you'll enjoy that another time, but you're not in the headspace. And also when I'm in Joe mode, it's all set
Yeah.
up for me to just believe myself, like
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Do you find, since you're so familiar with Joe now, is it something that is more kind of organic to write because you've been doing this for coming up to a decade now, or what is the mind space like now? Because as you said, to begin with. That first chapter you went over so much, whereas now I imagine it's almost second nature.
It is, and that's can be a little, like, disturbing, and then
Yeah.
but then comes back that doubt with writing that always happens of, like, "Is this him? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right?" And I've learned to
Mm.
know that, like, to kind of know what it feels like when it's right, you know? And but the need also, it's like I always am like, "Okay, starting is never easy," like, it's like the first draft thing of starting is just not easy, and
Yeah.
that's where I feel like sometimes it doesn't sound like him and I can get very panicked of like, I don't know how to do this. And then it's like I go out in the world and something clicks and I hear him in my head and I'm like, oh, that's right. And then I open up those pages. I'm like, oh, I know what that fucker would do right now and what he would
Yeah.
say. And yeah, so it's like almost getting the, like, nature back, but then that's what made it's, like, so addictive, but the worry too, I've never written a series, and I didn't
Mm.
necessarily plan to, and to me, there's an inherent fear of, like, it's kind of like when you're a kid and I did dance when I was little, and I would think, "How lucky are my parents? They get to go to this 6-hour recital and see all of this wonderful dancing," when in reality, like, my poor parents, like, all those poor
Yeah.
parents for, like, hours and, and they all wanna see their child, but that's how it feels to, like, "Oh my god, I'm doing more about him. What do I have to say?
Mm.
Why am I doing more?" Like, why? The why is a big deal of, like, what like, it's not enough that I like doing it, and also that the way my life was so different in 2013 and my emotional state.
Mm.
So, it's been a weird thing to, like, kind of go back to, like, what was just a terrible, emotionally, like, raw time, and I can get worried that, like, well, he was born out of that, and it's like
Mm.
with any loss, I lost my father a few months before I started the book, but
Mm.
it's like on the one hand, it can be a nice thing of like revisiting that time and then imagining like so that character was born out of that, but it doesn't mean that he's the same person as in the first book. But then it's like,
Mm.
why am I writing another book about him? Why?
Yeah.
Like I can't say that enough that I'm like, yeah, like why does this go on and on? And I like being I think it's probably because he's such a kind of punishing critical person that it brings that
Yeah.
out in me. And I
Yeah.
don't know if I yeah, where I was going, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean the thing that I see with Joe and that I see with a lot of stories that have this kind of villainous protagonist, for want of a better term, is I mean the whole thing is like to make you as a reader side with them on some level, you just make the other characters even more awful. And I mean, that
Yeah.
is a trick that we see people do time and time again. It is something that Nathan Ballingrad does a lot, particularly in his first short story collection, North American Lake Monsters, because or there's not really a kind of morally good person that Nathan Ballingrad writes about, but through surrounding his characters with other kind of flawed characters and potentially worse, it's like you can start rooting for them. And anyway, I think we kind of like that thing because it's more human. It's like there is no such thing as a good or a bad person. We are all painted in these different shades of gray, this rainbow really of personality and moral
Yes.
ambiguity.
Absolutely, and that's what really drove me when I was, coming up with it, and with every book that I'm going back to, like we are inside of his head. Like he was
Mm.
in part born out of my like the growing intensity of social media, and I'm like, this is just
Mm.
a bizarre thing for humans to do to like present ourselves, to respond publicly as if we're celebrities when something happens. You know what I mean? As if we have to make a
Mm.
statement and to even carry around like to walk through the world with this lens of like when you see something, am I going to share that, am I not, like just questions that didn't really exist before. My friend Lauren Okampor is a
Yeah.
great writer, and she well that like remember like you would just see a sunset, and if you took a picture, the picture has to be developed. There's not that option of sharing it with the world. So for
Mm.
me, Joe, like we all have this little asshole part of us. And I was like,
Yeah.
what if someone like their best friend is that asshole part and they think that that's the best part of them? And that was part of
Mm.
Joe, where I'm like, it's like an antisocial quality that all of this has made him more suspicious of people, warier of people, more aware of their flaws. And I also think I like what you said, because it's also the way about how, not about like they're being not good people, but the way different flaws, are rub up against each other and are just terrible. Like
Mm.
that's what I like.
Yeah.
Or like I like to put Joe with someone who activates his flaws, and someone who,
Mm.
yes, according to Joe, is absolutely a worse person than him, but always remembering that, like, it's Joe's perspective, it's his hypersensitivity, it's his insecurity, and that's what I like. And I feel like that's what makes so many stories, not just these, but like kind of click together, of seeing, oh, why did these two people have to meet? Because if they didn't meet, they both kind of assholes, but they would have been okay, but they
Yeah.
can't mix and they can't coexist. And I just love that energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in terms of the origin of Joe Goldberg, you were saying, born from kind of tragedy and poor personal circumstances with your father passing away. But I understand that, like, some of Joe's sense of humor is from your father. So I'm really interested to tap into that.
He had the sickest, darkest sense of humor, was like, and loved Lord of the Rings, Stephen King, all of like big
Mm,
horror, science fiction,
mm,
but read everything, watched everything, also loved like the Gilmore Girls. Like he could, he was so alive in his love of things. It was adorable when he hated technology too. Like he absolutely hated it. And that's also where I felt weird about this whole process, because
mm.
it was the like, "Don't put me on Facebook. I hate that. That's the end of the world. Stop looking at that
Yeah.
phone. That's the end." I'm like, "Oh God, you're a grumpy old man." But when he got his iPad, that he resisted at first, like a child with broccoli, when he found out
Yeah.
he could like find a concert on YouTube and he
Mm,
could play Scrabble, I was like, "See, it's not all so bad." And that was
yeah.
fun to see, toward the end of, I mean, it's like the way with all of this, there's a good side to it. And
Mm,
yeah. But yes, but yeah, that sick sense of humor, like at some point when he was like really sick, someone sent a smiley face balloon, and there was this picture, and it was just well meaning, but it was just like the funniest
mm.
fucking thing when it's like he's about 2 months out from the end and we all know it. And
Right.
there's this picture of him holding the balloon, and it's very disturbing, and it really stayed with me. And then I'd gone through the death, and I remember when I was writing the first book and thinking about that smiley face balloon and thinking of like how it would make me cry, but then come around to laughter because of my dad finding it so hysterical.
Yeah.
And that was that like kept me up at night, because it was like I'd never, obviously never lost a parent. And those things of
Yeah.
someone being gone when you're not getting that stimulation anymore is such a bizarre thing. So the way your brain goes back to them, and it has to go through the crying of like the shock of the goneness, to the like, oh, but they were here, this constant process. Like I feel like that's a big part of Joe. And the way that like some, like for me, he's kind of addicted to that a little bit. And that's where, like, much as he says he's looking for love, it's like, no, he likes for things not to work out, because he is the guy for whom things don't work out. And it's a little bit going back to my dad with the cancer thing. To me, the comedy, something he kind of laughed about, was like the way they would call it a battle. It's like, it's not a fucking
Yeah.
battle. Terminal cancer, like you're dying. And it's
Yeah.
comforting to be, oh, fighting. It's also fucked up to like kind of implies that someone didn't fight hard enough. And it's like it's just
Yeah.
funny language that we to give ourselves good feeling and to try and lift other people up. So he always had just a sick sense of humor about everything. And yeah, absolutely, that was part of my like wanting, knowing what he would get a kick out of, and then giving that to Joe, giving Joe a little bit of that, because that kind of thing also always fascinates me, because I feel like if someone makes you laugh, they can get away with a lot, just in life in general, and on a personal level, on a character level, it's just how we are. It feels good to laugh. And it's like if Joe's even a little funny, if people are smiling a little, there's an unconscious, like, I like this person, because it's that thing of the way
Yeah.
someone makes you feel. That's right. Someone
Yeah.
last week was like, books are oddly my comfort food. And I'm like, no, I do get that, because
Mm.
it's anxious comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm thinking about, well, first of all, I'm thinking about the image of someone dying from terminal cancer holding like a smiley face balloon, and like I think, like, if I was dying, I'd find that pretty funny too. It's like, what went through that fucker's head? Oh yeah, this balloon, this'll this'll be a good idea.
Yeah, it's like the
Um
wonder of humans. Like that's where it is so much fun that way because there's so
yeah.
many just pure dark, horrible things.
Mm,
And also I feel like the way men especially like the day that we found out just how bad it was, my brother was there, my mother, my father, we're all in the same room, we're all talking to the same doctor. The news was not good. There is no way around it. You know what I mean? My mom
yeah.
and I get into one elevator. We're both sobbing, hugging each other, just
Mm,
wreck. My dad and my brother get in another elevator. We all come out on the first floor, and my dad and my brother are like, "What are you so upset about?" And I'm like, "Did you hear?" And my dad's up there like, "Oh, medicine. They don't know everything." And my brother's like, "I've heard some positive." I'm like, is this what it's like to be a man? Like, this sounds great. Like, to just not, to be automatically go into denial like that and feel good.
yeah.
And that's where I wanted to like dive into that perspective because it did to this day kind of fascinate me.
Yeah. I wish that I had that level of almost what I want to term accidental stoicism. It's like you're told that you're gonna die or that your dad's gonna die, and you're like, well,
Yeah.
that's that then. It might be wrong. Medicine don't know
Most,
everything.
yeah. One of his lines was always, a common line. Nobody gets out of this alive. So what's the big deal? We're all going to die. Like, you start
Yeah.
dying when you're born. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, but still when it's actually happening in here. And he would have his dark, sad moments and all that, but I just loved
Mm,
like that ability to like make the sick joke and make fun of me. And I feel like as a kid especially, like that was a big part of it too, that like with Joe, that inside voice, I feel like my dad would say a lot of those types of things out loud. And I would have like there are pictures of me like,
mm,
outraged mad, but it's like that great thing of someone taking the piss out of you and kind of
yeah.
allowing you to like laugh a little and relax. And yes, I like that
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah, and you're so right in saying that, when you have terminal cancer or terminal anything, to use linguistically to say like it's a battle. It's like, no, 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 no. A battle you can win or lose. Maybe there's a draw, but if the outcome is predetermined, that isn't a battle. That's just
Exactly. Like,
inevitability.
yes. And I love, and in that way, to me, it's one of the great big fat like rationalizations that help us cope with so many things. And that's where I feel like that I wanted Joe to be like constantly rationalizing like that, but doing it privately. Because like
Yeah.
I get what helpful, like to think of that you have a shot at something. Like it reminds me of being in high school and I played on the tennis team. And one day I was playing a girl who
Mm,
was like there was no chance. You know what I mean? Like no
yeah.
chance. But I was like, "Oh, well, how do I do this if I don't secretly think there's a chance? Like, why does anyone do anything?" And it made me lighten up about getting my ass kicked because it was like, oh,
Yeah.
funny to that. Like, I went out there thinking for a second that, like, well, I might win. It's like Dumb and Dumber
Mm,
when she says, basically like 1 in a million. And he's like, so you're telling me there's a chance? It's like, we are humans. And I feel like we do at the end of the day. I'm sure there were very many days where my dad secretly did think, oh, but I'm going to beat it. Like, I'm going to be the one to like flip the switch, that like we all like to think that we have that secret something and need
mm,
to think it's like it is a good coping skill. But in the
yeah,
language of it, it's funny. Yes, when things are fatal and yeah.
yeah. I think, particularly with you mentioning the tennis match, I think kind of one of the secrets to happiness, but certainly easier said than done, is if you can find the joy in just the pursuit of doing something rather than in an end game. If the satisfaction is in the act, then you've won.
Yes. And if you can like in that way too kind of forget yourself and appreciate someone else's whatever they're doing. I feel like that's another like
Mm,
secret to happiness, right? Like to because I just remember thinking, okay, wow, it's how does she do that? Like, and I also, it's how you learn about yourself. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, she probably does all the exercise that my coach would tell me to do. That's where she has like a range of motion that I don't have. And, she jogs, and I was told to do that. I didn't do that either. I'm like, I get it. Like, it's absolutely part talent, but it's also part like taking it, working hard on it. And that was one of those things as a young person. It was like, I'm not ever going to be a professional tennis player because I can very much live without it. And I'm never going to
Yeah.
like need it or work that hard at it. And it was like, all right, I'm going to
Yeah.
figure out what I do. What I am willing to like kill myself doing.
Yeah.
And writing was absolutely it.
Yeah.
Yes.